The shuttle cut through the jade clouds of Varela like a silver blade. Inside, 20 cadets from 12 different species sat strapped in silence, their breathing masks fogging from humidity even before the hatch opened. The jungle below pulsed with color, green so deep they looked black, streaked with veins of luminous gold. The moment the landing struts touched the soil, the air itself seemed to come alive. Heat wrapped around them like a living organism. Insects the size of coins flitted in erratic spirals. The scent was a strange mixture of honey, rot, and iron. It clung to skin and scales alike. Eli Ward, the only human among them, felt the pressure of 100 alien eyes. He could already sense their expectations. Humans were a recent addition to the Galactic Academy. Adaptable, yes, but regarded as reckless primitives. The reptilian Varnak hissed that his species evolved in swamps and therefore knew best. A blue-scaled insectoid named Serene countered that her thermal vision would spot predators faster. Eli said nothing. He crouched and pressed his palm into the mud. The soil vibrated ever so slightly, not from their movement, but from something deeper, slower, more deliberate. The instructor's ship rose into the air without ceremony, its thrusters scattering spores into spiraling columns. As the roar faded into the distance, an unsettling quiet followed. The kind of silence that wasn't truly silent. It was filled with distant clicks, low whistles, and the heavy breathing of massive things hidden behind the dense walls of vines. The canopy overhead allowed only narrow beams of sunlight to pierce through, painting the world below in green and gold shadows. Drops of condensation fell in slow rhythm from branch to leaf, striking the helmets and shoulders of the cadets. Eli scanned the trees. Their trunks weren't smooth but scaled, covered with moss that quivered as if sensing his gaze. Some reached hundreds of meters high, disappearing into the mist. He could feel eyes somewhere above. Every instinct told him to get off the ground. Humans on Earth had once built tree houses for safety from predators. It was an old, almost ancestral reflex. But he didn't say that aloud. The others already dismissed him as a soft-world mammal. He knew the only way to earn their respect was through survival itself. The team began moving north, guided by Varnak's compass scale embedded in his forearm. The map on his screen glitched immediately, static lines and unreadable coordinates. The jungle's electromagnetic field scrambled every signal. Serene cursed in her tongue, antennae twitching. Eli walked behind, taking in the sensory chaos. The temperature was climbing fast. Each breath burned his lungs, thick with humidity and the faint tang of ozone. He noticed that every plant seemed designed to cut, poison, or trap. The vines had needle-thin thorns dripping with a cloudy sap. The ferns folded inward when brushed, releasing spores that glimmered like dust in sunlight. After an hour, they reached a clearing where a massive root system formed natural arches above the soil. The cadets dropped their packs and argued again about setting up camp. The avian cadet Kithor spread his wings and suggested taking to the trees, but his feathers were too soft for the acidic air. The amphibian twins croaked that the water nearby looked safe enough for a shelter. Eli watched the pool shimmer faintly purple, a color that meant death in every xenobiological chart. He kept his thoughts to himself, quietly filling a flask with filtered water from his personal canteen instead. Suddenly, the ground trembled again, not from footsteps, but from something moving beneath the soil. A ripple of vibration passed under the clearing, followed by the faintest crackling sound. Serene froze, antennae extended. "Movement below!" she hissed. Varnak raised his spear and ordered everyone to stay still, but the panic had already begun. One of the smaller cadets, a feathered creature with translucent skin, bolted for the nearest log. Eli caught a glimpse of something large shifting beneath the surface, following the vibrations of each step. He remembered what he'd read in the archives. Virilan burrow beasts, hunted not by sight, but by sensing tremors in the ground, like sharks smelling blood in water. He lifted his foot and placed it softly on a root. then another. The tremor under him lessened. The creature's movement slowed. "Get off the ground," he whispered sharply. But the others weren't listening. Varnak stomped his spear to assert dominance, sending another shock through the earth. The result was immediate. The soil exploded in a storm of dirt and claws. A gigantic, vine-colored creature erupted from below, a segmented predator with a maw lined by serrated petals that snapped open like a flower of knives. It seized one of the supply crates and vanished again underground before anyone could react. The clearing erupted in screams and confusion. The cadets scattered into the undergrowth, tripping over roots and each other. Eli swung himself onto the nearest tree, gripping the bark as it cut into his hands. He climbed fast, ignoring the pain, until he reached a thick branch high enough to feel the air move differently, cooler, drier, safer. From above, he saw the ground churning like boiling water. The predator circled twice, searching for more vibrations, then slipped back into the depths with a hiss. The others regrouped an hour later, shaken and furious. Varnak's arrogance evaporated. His armor was splattered with mud and sap. The team's morale plummeted. They had already lost most of their food, half of their gear, and the only communication beacon. The reptilian cadet blamed Serene for not detecting it sooner. Serene accused the amphibians of stirring too loudly in the mud. Eli didn't join the shouting. He was staring at the pattern the creature had left behind. Circular depressions where it had tunneled, spiraling around a single untouched area near the base of the tallest tree. He realized that the predators avoided the resin dripping from the tree's bark. The scent was sharp, acrid, and slightly sweet. Instinctively, he knew this was a kind of natural repellent. He scraped a small amount onto his sleeve and climbed again, higher this time. The canopy stretched endlessly above him, branches woven so tightly they formed a second floor above the world. The air changed, lighter, more breathable, carrying the scent of life instead of decay. From this vantage point, he could see faint rays of sunlight breaking through the mist, glinting on distant cliffs. And more importantly, he could see movement. Dozens of glowing shapes slithering below, but none daring to approach the tree he stood on. When he finally descended, the others were exhausted and drenched in sweat. Night was approaching fast. The jungle's glow dimmed to blue, signaling the shift of nocturnal life. The air vibrated again, not from footsteps, but from the deep droning hum of thousands of insects waking up. Eli landed softly on a branch and spoke just loud enough for them to hear. "You're building shelters on the ground," he said. "You're feeding the earth itself." The others ignored him at first, but when the soil beneath their temporary camp began to stir again, they looked up at him with fear in their eyes. He gestured toward the tree behind him, the same one with the resin that kept predators away. "Up there," he said simply. "That's where we live tonight." None of them moved. They looked uncertain, ashamed, unwilling to follow a human. But the earth shifted again, and this time the sound was closer, the grinding of bone under soil. The alien cadets exchanged glances, and one by one they began climbing. Clumsy, frightened, scraping their hands and claws against the bark, but climbing nonetheless. Eli stayed below until the last of them was safe above the ground. Then he glanced back into the darkness. The jungle breathed again, slow, heavy, patient. As he climbed into the canopy, he made a silent promise to himself. He wouldn't just survive, he would show them what humans did when the world tried to kill them. He would build something the jungle itself couldn't tear down. The mist thickened around the trees, glowing faintly in the starlight filtering through the leaves. For a moment they believed they had made it through the worst, but the jungle was deceptive. It never attacked in the same way twice. The air was still heavy, but something had changed. The insects that had sung through the night were gone, replaced by a deep silence that seemed to hum through the trunks themselves. Eli noticed it first, a tremor running along the branch beneath his feet. It wasn't the steady rhythm of the burrow beasts from the previous night. This was sharper, more irregular, as if something large was climbing rather than tunneling. He turned his head slowly, scanning the vines that hung like curtains all around them. For an instant, he thought he saw one of them move against the wind. Before he could speak, one of the cadets screamed. A thick vine, slick and green, whipped across the branch and coiled around her arm. She was a light-bodied amphibian, quick but fragile, and the vine's pull nearly tore her from her perch. Eli lunged forward, grabbing her other hand. The surface of the vine pulsed. It wasn't a plant at all, but a predator mimicking one. Its texture was warm, alive, contracting with every heartbeat. More of them dropped from the canopy above, uncoiling like serpents. The entire jungle seemed to come alive, shaking the branches and leaves in a frenzy. "Cut it!" shouted Varnak, his voice deep and guttural. He slashed with his spear, slicing through one of the tendrils, but the blade barely left a mark. The creature retracted and disappeared into the greenery, only to reappear from another direction. Panic spread faster than the vines themselves. The cadets tried to scramble higher, but the living tendrils followed, wrapping around limbs, dragging equipment, tearing packs apart. Eli didn't waste time shouting. He drew the small survival knife he always kept strapped to his thigh. Simple earth steel, not designed for alien biology, but sharp enough to cut through anything that bled. He struck low, aiming where the vine met the bark. The blade bit deep, releasing a burst of black-green fluid that burned on contact with skin. The creature recoiled instantly, flailing as if in pain, and vanished into the shadows. He turned back to the amphibian, who was trembling, her skin discolored where the vine had gripped her. The others were yelling over each other, trying to find an escape route. Above them, the canopy shook violently, as if the entire forest was reacting to their panic. The sound was overwhelming, leaves thrashing, branches cracking, the hiss of unseen creatures responding to the noise. Eli looked upward and made a decision. Every 10 meters brought a new world, one filled with glowing moss, another with shrieking birds that scattered at their passage, another with thick webs of silk spun by translucent arachnids the size of his hand. The air grew thinner, cooler. When he finally reached the upper canopy, sunlight struck his face for the first time in 2 days. The sky above was pale green, streaked with clouds that drifted like sheets of vapor. The cadets collapsed onto the branches, gasping for breath. None spoke for several minutes. The silence felt fragile, but it was a silence of safety. The vines had stopped chasing them. The forest below was calm again. Eli wiped the black fluid from his hands onto a leaf. His skin stung, but he ignored it. He was more interested in what the substance meant. The fluid had a chemical smell, sharp and oily, and when it touched the leaf, the plant curled away instantly. That explained the tree's upper protection. The resin he had found earlier likely repelled this same creature. Varnak approached, breathing heavily, his scales glistening with sweat. "We should go back down," he said. "Our supplies are below." Eli turned toward him slowly. "You can go," he replied, "but the ground doesn't want us anymore." The alien's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. The others watched them in silence. The hierarchy that had defined the group at the start of the trial was dissolving. The jungle had stripped away titles, ranks, and pride. Only survival mattered now. As the sun climbed higher, the heat returned, unbearable even in the canopy. The cadets began to argue again, about water, about shade, about food. Eli listened, letting them exhaust their fear. When the shouting stopped, he spoke quietly. "There's something alive in every direction," he said. "Everything here hunts by sound or motion. We can't fight that. We have to change where we live." He pointed toward a massive tree in the distance, one that stood even higher than the rest, its trunk wide enough to hold a dozen cadets side by side. "That's where we start," he said. "It's got resin, elevation, and structure. We build from there." His tone was calm, almost casual, but there was a weight to his words that made the group listen. They were too tired to argue, and somewhere inside, they already understood that no one else had a better plan. They began the slow traverse across the canopy. The upper branches formed a tangled network, like a web stretched between towers. Some parts creaked under their weight, others were thick and springy. Eli led the way, testing each step with careful precision. The world below looked like a green ocean, the air above like glass. Once, he paused to watch a flock of translucent creatures float past. Jellyfish-shaped beings that drifted through the air, their tendrils glowing faintly. They moved in silence, completely indifferent to the chaos that raged below the canopy. By mid-afternoon, the cadets reached the great tree. Its surface shimmered with the same resin he had discovered before, but now he saw how it worked. The sap oozed continuously, sealing any wound and forming a barrier that trapped insects and spores. It was a living fortress. Eli placed his hand on the bark and felt the faint pulse within. "This one breathes differently," he murmured to himself. He ordered everyone to rest and scouted the immediate surroundings. There were no predator signs here, no claw marks or nests. The air was clearer, almost sterile. He gathered a handful of resin and tested its stickiness. It hardened quickly, turning translucent in seconds. With this, he realized, he could build. Not just shelter, but structure. Something permanent enough to survive the storm cycles that Varela was known for. As the sun began to set, the jungle below ignited with light again. Bioluminescent plants, insects, and even spores shimmered in waves of color. It looked almost beautiful from above, but Eli knew it was only the jungle resetting its trap for the night. The cadets watched in silence, their fear mixed with awe. For the first time since landing, they were seeing the world not as victims, but as witnesses to its power. That night, while the others slept, Eli remained awake. He sat with his back against the trunk, sharpening his knife and sketching plans in the dirt of a wide branch. His mind moved in quiet precision, lines, angles, supports. The jungle below breathed and shifted, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He understood now that survival on Varela wasn't about strength or speed. It was about balance, living within the rhythm of a place that didn't care whether he existed or not. When dawn approached again, he looked at the horizon and saw the faint shimmer of a coming storm. The clouds moved unnaturally fast, swirling in tight spirals. It would reach them by evening. The others still slept, unaware of what was coming. Eli rose slowly, stretching his stiff arms. He touched the trunk of the great tree once more, feeling the slow heartbeat of sap within it. "You'll hold?" he whispered. Then he turned to the cadets, still sleeping across the branches, and made a silent promise, the same one that had carried him through every hardship back on Earth. He would not let panic win. He would give them something stronger than fear. By nightfall, he intended to begin. The jungle had chosen its next test, but so had he. The war between instinct and ingenuity had only just begun. The morning came with a strange quiet that didn't belong to Varela. The usual chorus of insects and hidden beasts was muted, replaced by the low rustling of wind in the canopy. The storm Eli had seen on the horizon was gathering, still distant but growing darker every hour. The others felt it too. The reptilian cadet Varnak paced along the branch like a caged animal, his scales flickering from green to gray in restless agitation. The amphibian girl, still weak from the vine attack, sat motionless beside the trunk, staring down into the mist below as if something there still watched her. None spoke much. Words had become a luxury. Eli knew time was running out. He had already memorized the behavior of the jungle well enough to know that storms here didn't behave like the ones on Earth. They weren't just wind and water, they were entire living systems, capable of stripping bark, toppling trees, and spawning creatures that rode the lightning like predators of the sky. He couldn't explain it in alien terms, and even if he could, he doubted the others would believe him. They still looked at him as a strange anomaly, useful, perhaps, but not yet one of them. He stood at the edge of the great tree's platform, feeling the resin under his boots. The sap had hardened into a glassy crust overnight, sealing cracks and smoothing the surface. That gave him an idea. He ran his hand along the resin until it stuck to his fingers, then rolled it into a thin line. When it cooled, it became firm, yet flexible, perfect for binding. He smiled faintly. The jungle, hostile as it was, provided everything it needed to survive. He called for the others to gather. Most were reluctant at first. The memory of the vines still haunted them, and the thought of moving through the branches again made them uneasy. But Eli's voice carried an authority that didn't come from rank. It came from certainty. He explained quickly what had to be done. They would build above the resin line, where predators wouldn't follow and where the air remained stable. Each branch would connect to another through tension bridges of woven vines. The structure had to be high enough to stay dry during the storm and flexible enough to move with the wind. The plan sounded insane to the others. None of the alien cadets had ever built anything without technology. Their species were accustomed to plasma cutters and levitation tools, not knots and leverage. But Eli didn't wait for approval. He tore a strand of living vine from a nearby branch and began braiding it with another, pulling it tight until it sang like a string under tension. The motion was simple, repetitive, and strangely calming. He tied the first loop around a protruding limb, testing its strength. When it held, he nodded. "This will do," he said. Hours passed as he worked. Sweat rolled down his face, and his hands blistered from the coarse texture of the vines, but he moved with focus and rhythm. He spoke little, only giving instructions when someone hesitated. Slowly, others joined. Serene, the insectoid with the thermal vision, turned out to be surprisingly dexterous. Her six-fingered hands could weave faster than his, and she soon understood how to balance tension and slack. Varnak provided strength, bending young branches into arcs for the frame. The amphibian girl mixed the resin with powdered bark to create a thicker adhesive. For the first time since landing, the cadets worked as one unit. By midday, the first platform took shape. A suspended floor made of woven branches, hardened with resin, and anchored to 3 thick trunks. It swayed with the wind but held firm. The others climbed onto it cautiously, testing the surface with hesitant steps. When it didn't collapse, some of them laughed nervously. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a miracle to them. For a brief moment, the fear that had stalked them since the first night began to fade. Eli didn't smile. He knew this was only the beginning. The storm had crept closer, and the air around them shimmered with static charge. He felt it on his skin, the faint prickling that always preceded lightning. He turned toward the horizon, where the green sky had deepened to a bruised purple. "We need walls," he said quietly, "and roofs before nightfall." The others looked at him in confusion. "Roofs?" Serene asked. "You mean shields?" Eli nodded. "Something to keep the rain from killing us." He climbed higher, cutting broad leaves from the upper canopy. Each was larger than his entire body, thick and waxy like flexible armor. He hauled them down one by one, fastening them across the frame in overlapping layers. The resin worked like glue, sealing the seams and hardening into a semi-transparent shell. Within hours, the upper structure began to resemble something almost human, half tent, half cocoon. The alien cadets watched him move, puzzled and impressed. They had never seen such improvised craftsmanship, and it unsettled them to realize how naturally he adapted to chaos. When the first thunder rolled through the sky, the entire canopy trembled. Birds and insects burst from the branches in waves, fleeing toward the horizon. The air darkened rapidly, filled with flashes of light that illuminated the forest in white bursts. Eli climbed onto the roof and drove wooden pegs through the vines to reinforce the supports. His arms burned from exhaustion, but he didn't stop. He worked until the wind became strong enough to shake the entire structure. Varnak shouted at him to come down, but he didn't listen. He pressed the last leaf panel into place and slid back onto the main platform. The storm hit seconds later. The first gust nearly tore the roof apart, but the resin held. Then came the rain, not drops, but sheets of liquid fire. The acidic water hissed as it struck the leaves, burning through anything unprotected. The cadets screamed as the canopy above them steamed and crackled. The smell was unbearable, a mix of ozone and corrosion. Eli pressed his hand against the resin wall. It vibrated but did not break. The structure bent with the wind, just as he had designed it to. Every fiber strained, but it held. The noise outside was deafening, lightning splitting trees, beasts howling, rain pounding against the living fortress. Inside, though, there was order. The aliens huddled together, their wide eyes reflecting the flashes of light through the translucent roof. Eli sat near the entrance, knife in hand, watching for breaches. He felt the structure breathing with the storm, moving but never breaking. Hours passed before the winds began to fade. When the last rumble drifted away into the distance, silence returned, a heavy, fragile silence. The air inside the shelter was hot and wet, but they were alive. Not a single cadet had been lost. When the others finally realized it, a quiet cheer spread through the group. Serene looked at Eli and said something in her language, a word he didn't understand, but her tone carried respect. He stepped outside onto the branch. The jungle below had transformed. Trees had fallen. The ground was flooded with glowing water, and new species already crawled from the wreckage to claim the fresh terrain. Yet the great tree stood untouched, its resin armor glistening in the storm's aftermath. The shelter above shimmered in the faint returning sunlight, every leaf shining with moisture. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was proof of control, a human footprint in a place that rejected all others. Eli took a deep breath and looked across the canopy. The other cadets emerged behind him, silent, awed by what they saw. From this height, the jungle stretched infinitely, endless layers of green and gold, each one hiding something unknown. For the first time, they could look at it without fear. He turned to them and spoke quietly. "We can make more," he said. "Platforms, walkways, gardens if we find seeds. This can work." None argued. They understood that something had changed between them. He was no longer just a strange human among alien cadets. He was their anchor, the one who could turn chaos into order. The storm had tested more than their strength. It had revealed who among them could lead when reason failed. As night fell again, the jungle glowed beneath their new home, alive yet distant. Eli sat at the edge of the platform, looking into the mist, the hum of insects returning like a familiar song. His hands were raw, his muscles ached, but his mind was calm. The blueprint was no longer in his head. It was in the air, the resin, and the vines around him. Tomorrow he would begin the second stage, connecting platforms across the canopy to create a city in the trees. But for now, he allowed himself one small moment of rest. He leaned back against the trunk and watched the stars flicker through the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, the predators still moved, but none dared to approach the great tree. He had turned fear into structure, chaos into balance, and as the wind carried the scent of resin and rain through the air, Eli finally smiled. For the first time, the jungle didn't feel like an enemy. It felt like a conversation, and he was learning its language, one branch at a time. By the next sunset, the jungle seemed calmer than it had in days. The storm's residue shimmered across every leaf, and the air carried a heavy sweetness of sap and ozone. The cadets' makeshift shelters had survived intact, their resin shells gleaming in faint reflections of the descending sun. For the first time, there was something that resembled peace. The team had eaten the last of their rationed fruit and were working in quiet rhythm, repairing joints and tightening vines. Eli watched them from the upper platform, his eyes scanning the horizon. The storm had passed, but he didn't trust the silence that followed. He had lived through too many disasters on too many worlds to mistake calm for safety. The light dimmed fast. When the last trace of the twin suns disappeared, the jungle transformed into a sea of shadows. Bioluminescent spores drifted upward like fireflies, painting the darkness in hues of blue and green. The others sat close together, too tired to speak. Eli sharpened his knife by habit, more to steady his thoughts than out of need. He listened to the rhythm of the forest, one sound at a time, the dripping of water, the distant shriek of an unseen bird, the faint creak of resin cooling in the night air. Then came a sound that didn't belong, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled through the wood beneath him, so low it made his teeth ache. Every cadet froze. The sound came again, closer this time, and it was followed by another, higher in pitch, like the answering call of a second creature. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath. Eli stood slowly and looked through the gaps in the canopy. In the distance, two enormous shapes moved between the trees, their silhouettes catching the dim light. He couldn't tell what they were, but each step they took shook the branches around them. "Stay quiet," he whispered, motioning for the others to move away from the edge. The amphibian girl began trembling. Serene's antennae quivered, detecting heat signatures beyond the immediate area. "Something's coming," she whispered. Eli nodded. He could already feel it. Whatever the creatures were, they were hunting. The first roar shattered the night. It was a sound so powerful that it rippled through the canopy like a wave. Birds erupted from the trees in a frenzy, filling the air with wings and cries. The cadets covered their ears, but the sound wasn't just noise, it was vibration, deep enough to shake the resin walls of the shelter. Eli felt the structure sway and moved instantly, climbing toward the outer branches. The others tried to stop him, but he ignored their pleas. He needed to see what was happening before panic consumed everyone again. He reached the highest platform, gripping the slick bark as the wind stirred. The scene below took his breath away. The jungle floor glowed faintly from the storm's residue, revealing two colossal beasts emerging from the shadows. They resembled a fusion of reptile and machine, armored scales glinting like metal, jaws glowing with bioluminescent veins. Their eyes were twin embers of cold fire. One of them lowered its head to the ground and began to dig, ripping up entire roots as if searching for something. The other turned its gaze upward, nostrils flaring. Eli realized with a chill that it had caught their scent. The creatures began to circle the base of the great tree, their movements slow but deliberate. The vibrations made the resin drip from the bark in tiny glowing streams. The cadets whispered in fear, clutching their tools and weapons. Some wanted to run deeper into the canopy, others wanted to climb higher. Eli knew both would be mistakes. Running would create vibrations that would draw the creature's attention, and climbing too high would expose them to the open air. He took a breath and forced his voice to stay calm. "No movement," he ordered. "No sound. The tree will hold if we don't shake it." The command cut through the panic. The others obeyed, freezing in place. The beasts circled below, their claws scraping against the bark with a sound like grinding stone. One of them raised its head again and released another roar, shaking loose a rain of leaves and sap. Then, without warning, the creature struck. It slammed its body against the trunk, making the entire tree quake. The platforms groaned, resin cracked, the amphibian girl screamed, and the second beast reacted instantly to the sound. It leapt, jaws snapping, tearing into a lower branch and pulling part of it down. The impact sent a shockwave through the entire structure. Eli didn't think, he acted. He climbed down in one fluid motion, knife in hand. The others stared at him as if he had gone mad. "What are you doing?" Serene shouted, her voice breaking. "You can't fight that!" He ignored her. "Keep the structure stable," he said. "If the main support breaks, we all fall." He descended to the mid-level platform and began cutting ropes. Not the structural ones, but the decoy vines he had used to balance weight distribution. The sudden loss of tension made the upper branches sway. The beasts reacted instantly, snapping toward the movement. Eli smiled grimly. "Good," he muttered. "Follow me up here." He sliced another rope, sending a large bundle of leaves crashing down on the opposite side of the tree. The motion confused the predators. They turned their attention toward the falling debris. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small glassy chunk of resin, still soft from the heat of the day. He rubbed it between his palms, spreading the scent, then hurled it as far as his arm could throw. It landed several trees away, shattering against a trunk. The smell spread quickly, carried by the humid wind. The predators' heads jerked in that direction. Their senses were sharp, but their instincts were stronger. One beast bellowed and began lumbering toward the scent. The other followed after a few seconds, still reluctant, but soon disappearing into the fog. The jungle quieted again. The only sounds left were the creaking of branches and the ragged breathing of the cadets above. Eli stayed where he was for a moment, gripping the branch and listening. He didn't move until the vibrations beneath his feet faded completely. Then he climbed back up. When he emerged on the main platform, the others were staring at him as if he had stepped out of a myth. Serene was the first to speak. "You made them leave," she said in disbelief. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "I distracted them. They'll come." The jungle was alive again, but quieter now, as if acknowledging what had happened. The wind carried faint echoes of distant roars, growing weaker with each passing minute. He thought of the beasts, massive, primal, unstoppable, and how easily they could have ended all of them. Yet they hadn't. The thought filled him not with pride, but with a kind of awe. Survival here wasn't conquest, it was negotiation. Serene approached quietly, her movements cautious. She placed a small pouch beside him, a mixture of crushed leaves and cooling resin. "For your arm," she said. He nodded, wrapping it around the cut. The mixture stung at first, then cooled the burning skin. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking again. "You understand this place," she said softly. "Not just how to live in it, but how to speak to it." Eli didn't respond. He stared into the mist until her footsteps faded. The jungle below pulsed with faint blue light, like a heartbeat. He wondered if Varela was truly alive in some larger sense, an organism testing every intruder, learning from every failure. If that was true, then he wasn't just surviving it. He was teaching it what a human was capable of. Hours later, the others slept again, but he remained awake, his knife resting beside him. The tree swayed gently, the air warm against his face. Every creak, every breath of wind felt alive. He thought of the cities on Earth, the metal towers built to defy nature, and how fragile they seemed now compared to this living structure of vine and resin. Here, survival wasn't a war against the world. It was a conversation in which one wrong word could mean death. He leaned his head back against the trunk and closed his eyes, listening to the rhythmic thrum beneath him. The tree was breathing. The forest was watching. And far below, the echoes of the beasts faded into silence, leaving behind only the whisper of the wind. The night of roars had ended, but the jungle had learned something new. So had he. When dawn returned to Varela, it came not as light, but as a slow silver haze that seeped through the canopy, washing over the jungle like breath. The rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt sacred. The air smelled of resin, ozone, and new growth. Every leaf glittered with dew, each drop reflecting the faint shimmer of the twin suns rising beyond the mist. Eli sat awake before the others, his eyes tracing the horizon where the night's darkness was fading into pale gold. He hadn't slept. He couldn't. The jungle had a rhythm now, one he could feel through every vibration in the tree, every distant pulse of life below. It wasn't threatening him anymore. It was simply aware of him. The cadets stirred slowly, groaning, stretching, blinking against the soft light. Serene climbed out first, her translucent wings glistening in the morning damp. Varnak followed, his scales darkened to a steady bronze, his earlier arrogance replaced with quiet focus. The amphibian girl looked stronger. The wound on her arm had healed into a faint silver line. They didn't speak much anymore. Words had become unnecessary. The human's orders had turned into habits, his instincts into their shared routine. Eli rose and stepped to the edge of the platform. From there, the world looked entirely different. What had once been chaos now resembled design. The treehouse he had built stood tall and alive, the resin walls glimmering like glass in the sun. The connecting bridges between trees formed a web that stretched out into the mist, each line swaying gently with the wind. Below, the ground was hidden under a sea of green fog. It looked like a planet reborn, untouched by anything unnatural. He took a deep breath and called the others together. "It's time to send the signal," he said. Serene tilted her head. "You think they'll still be listening?" He smiled faintly. "They'll hear us if the storm didn't tear the relay apart. And if they don't, we'll find another way." He looked at the crude antenna he had fashioned from fragments of their broken equipment. It was ugly, uneven, and fragile, but it hummed faintly with potential. He had spent most of the night adjusting the frequency by ear, listening to the faint static of the galaxy beyond the clouds. Varnak helped him lift the makeshift device into position. Serene's eyes widened. "They received it!" she shouted. "The Academy ship! It's on its way!" For a moment, no one moved. Then a wave of relief spread across the platforms. Laughter, loud and unrestrained, echoed through the branches. Some of the cadets began to cry. Even Varnak, who had barely smiled since the beginning, let out a rough chuckle. The noise startled a flock of bright-winged birds, sending them spinning into the air. Eli watched the scene quietly. He didn't feel joy. He felt something heavier, deeper. A strange ache of recognition. The jungle had tested him in ways nothing else had, and now that it was ending, he realized he would miss it. The retrieval ship arrived hours later, descending through the mist like a falling star. Its engines scattered the clouds, revealing the full height of the great tree. The cadets shielded their eyes from the light. The ship's voice came through a loudspeaker, mechanical and precise. "Survivors detected, preparing for extraction." Eli gathered the group and signaled to the pilot with a reflective shard of resin. The ship lowered cables toward the platform, and one by one the cadets climbed into the harnesses. Serene hesitated before stepping into hers. "You're coming too, right?" she asked. Eli smiled faintly. "In a minute." She nodded and ascended, vanishing into the light. When the last harness came down for him, he didn't grab it immediately. He turned once more to look at the world around him. The wind moved through the leaves like a whisper. The vines he had tied by hand swayed gently, still strong. The platforms glistened with dew, the resin shimmering like liquid sunlight. It no longer felt like a structure he had built. It felt like it had grown from the tree itself, as if the jungle had accepted it, accepted him. He walked along the bridge to the farthest edge, where the canopy opened toward the horizon. The twin suns were fully above the mist now, illuminating the vast landscape below. From this height, he could see the storm's scars, rivers that had changed course, valleys carved by floods, broken branches now serving as nests for new life. Even destruction here gave birth to something beautiful. He wondered if the galaxy beyond could ever understand that kind of balance. A sound behind him made him turn. Varnak stood there, holding out the harness. "You'll miss the ride if you stay," the reptilian said with a smirk that almost resembled warmth. Eli chuckled softly and took the strap. "Just saying goodbye," he replied. "To the teacher." Varnak frowned. "Teacher?" Eli nodded toward the forest. "This place. It taught me more than any academy ever could." As he secured the harness, a sudden gust of wind rushed through the canopy, bending the branches but not breaking them. The vines flexed, the platform swayed, and for a brief second, it felt as if the jungle itself was breathing farewell. He smiled to himself. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're listening." The ship pulled him upward, through layers of leaves and light. Below him, the world of Virella stretched endlessly, green, luminous, alive. The cadets watched from the hatch as he approached, his figure rising through the mist like a ghost of the forest. When he stepped aboard, the pilot looked astonished. "You built that?" the man asked, pointing to the network of shelters still visible through the viewport. Eli nodded but said nothing. Words couldn't explain it. As the ship rose higher, the jungle faded into a patchwork of green and gold beneath the clouds. The comms officer reported to the Academy station, "Extraction complete. All cadets accounted for. 1 human-initiated structural adaptation. Records pending review." The phrase sounded sterile, stripped of meaning, but Eli didn't care. He wasn't thinking about reports or ranks. He was thinking of the wind that had carried resin's scent through the air, of the night when predators roared, and of the quiet dawn that had turned fear into peace. Serene sat across from him, watching his expression. "You'll come back, won't you?" she asked softly. He looked out the window at the fading canopy. "Maybe," he said. "But if I do, it won't be for survival training. It'll be to learn what else this place wants to teach." The ship broke through the last of the clouds, revealing the cold black of space. Stars burned in silence, vast and indifferent. Yet for Eli, they no longer seemed distant. They were just another part of the same conversation, the one between creation and adaptation, between life that endures and life that learns. When the planet finally disappeared beneath them, he closed his eyes and let the hum of the engines replace the pulse of the jungle. He didn't know what the Academy would call what he had done. Leadership, ingenuity, luck. It didn't matter. What mattered was the truth that had settled in his mind. Humanity's strength had never been its weapons or its machines. It was its ability to make a home anywhere, even in a world that wanted to erase it. As the ship turned toward the stars, Eli leaned back and allowed himself to rest for the first time since landing. The jungle had let him live, but it had also changed him. Somewhere deep inside, a small part of Varella's rhythm still pulsed in time with his heartbeat. And as the galaxy stretched before him, he realized that no matter how far he went, some part of him would always remain in that golden light above the canopy, where the human had built not just a shelter, but a lesson written in the language of survival.